The line at the downtown bank moved slowly that morning, but no one noticed the tension building in the air. Among the crowd stood a 38-year-old black woman named Angela Carter, holding a simple folder of documents and a check she had worked years to earn. She smiled politely, waiting for her turn, never imagining that her dignity was about to be dragged through the mud in front of strangers. Behind the glass walls of his office, the bank manager leaned toward the phone. His eyes shifted suspiciously toward Angela, narrowing with quiet contempt. He whispered urgently, his tone sharp, his expression set with the certainty of a man convinced of guilt before hearing a word of truth. Angela felt it, the stares, the whispers, the unease spreading like wildfire. The teller's hands trembled slightly as she asked Angela to wait just a little longer. Something was wrong. Something cruel was about to unfold. And then the sound. Heavy boots, sharp commands, the hiss of radios. The front doors of the bank swung open, and in walked armed federal agents. Their presence froze the room. Mothers pulled their children close, customers stepped back in alarm, and every eye fell on Angela. Her chest tightened. Her palms grew damp. She hadn't done anything wrong. So why did it feel like the whole world had turned against her? The manager pointed at her, voice quivering yet triumphant. There she is. That's the one. Arrest her. Gasps filled the room. Angela stood rooted to the spot, her folder pressed against her chest like a shield. She could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, louder than the shuffle of feet, louder than the murmurs of disbelief. If you believe no innocent person should ever suffer this kind of humiliation, hit subscribe and like this video now, because this story will shake your heart. The lead agent stepped forward, eyes scanning Angela's papers, his expression unreadable. The room held its breath. And then something no one expected happened. But what happened next, no one could have imagined. To understand how Angela Carter found herself in that humiliating moment inside the bank, we must go back to who she truly was. Because behind that calm face, behind those trembling hands, was a woman whose story most people in that room could never have guessed. Angela was 38 years old, a daughter, a caretaker, and a woman who had carried the weight of responsibility since she was barely old enough to understand what the word meant. She grew up in a modest neighborhood where survival depended not on wealth, but on resilience. Her father had passed away when she was just 16, leaving her mother and younger brother under her watch. From that day on, Angela became more than a daughter. She became the backbone of her family. Her mornings started before dawn. As a registered nurse, she worked double shifts at the local hospital. Nights on her feet, comforting the sick, tending to emergencies, holding the hands of strangers who clung to life. While most people complained about exhaustion, Angela wore hers like a quiet badge of honor. Each drop of sweat meant another bill paid, another step closer to the dream she carried in her heart. A home of her own where her mother could rest peacefully, where her brother's children could come visit without the noise of landlords and rent collectors knocking on the door. For years she had saved, cutting corners, skipping vacations, saying no to luxuries that others considered basic. When colleagues splurged on new cars, Angela held on to her aging sedan. When neighbors bought the latest gadgets, she stacked away her modest earnings in a savings account. Every sacrifice added up. And now, finally, she was at the finish line. That morning, Angela entered the bank not as a beggar asking for favors, but as a woman ready to claim what she had worked tirelessly for. The check she carried represented more than money. It was proof of her sacrifice, her discipline, her long nights and lonely mornings. Yet the world she lived in had a cruel habit of questioning people like her. She had felt it before. The lingering glances when she entered expensive stores, the skeptical tone when she presented her ID, the subtle pause when her card was swiped for a larger purchase. Each moment was small enough to dismiss, but together they formed a heavy burden Angela carried in silence. Inside the bank, she noticed it again. The teller's hesitant smile. The way the manager's eyes narrowed when he overheard the amount she intended to deposit. A shadow passed across his face. Not the expression of professionalism, but of judgment. Angela told herself not to overthink it. Stay calm. You've earned this. Just one more step, and it will all be yours. But destiny had other plans. As Angela waited patiently, her thoughts wandered to her mother back home, sitting by the window in her favorite rocking chair. She imagined the joy on her face when she would finally reveal the surprise. That the house was theirs, that they no longer had to live under the uncertainty of landlords or rising rent. That vision gave Angela strength. She stood tall, ignoring the uneasy looks around her. She didn't yet know that the very check she carried, the fruit of her labor, was being twisted into suspicion. Behind the glass wall, the manager whispered into the phone, his voice tinged with disbelief. There's no way this can be real. Not for her. Angela glanced at her watch, wondering why the process was taking so long. The teller avoided her eyes. Customers shifted impatiently in line. A knot formed in her stomach. She had no idea. Her life was about to change forever, not because of the money, but because of the storm about to erupt in the heart of that bank. And this was only the beginning. Angela Carter shifted uneasily on her feet as the line behind her grew restless. She had been waiting for nearly 20 minutes, far longer than a simple deposit should take. The teller had excused herself twice already, disappearing into the back office with her papers, only to return with vague reassurances. Just a moment longer, ma'am. The manager is reviewing some details. The words were polite, but the tone was uneasy. Angela felt it. Something wasn't right. The glass door to the manager's office opened, and out stepped a tall man in a sharp suit. His nameplate read Mr. Douglas. He looked around the lobby with a commanding air, his gaze finally landing on Angela. His eyes narrowed, scanning her from head to toe, not as a professional serving a client, but as a detective sizing up a suspect. He approached slowly, hands clasped behind his back. Miss Carter, is it? Angela nodded politely. Yes. Is there a problem with my deposit? Douglas smirked, his voice carrying just enough volume for nearby customers to hear. Well, that depends. This is quite a large sum for someone like you. We just want to make sure everything checks out. The words stung, not just their meaning, but the deliberate way he said someone like you. A woman in line raised her eyebrows, whispering something to her husband. Another customer shifted uncomfortably, trying not to stare. Angela swallowed hard, fighting to keep her composure. It's from the sale of my late father's property. I have all the supporting documents. Douglas raised an eyebrow. We'll see about that. He turned sharply and motioned to the teller. Stall her. I need to make some calls. Angela's heart sank. Stall her? Calls. She looked down at her folder, the neat stack of documents she had organized with such care. She had anticipated questions, yes, but not this hostility. Not this public doubt of her integrity. And just when she thought the humiliation couldn't get worse. Minutes dragged into an eternity. Angela could feel the eyes on her, the curious, the judgmental, the sympathetic. Some customers whispered loudly enough for her to hear. Probably a scam. Must be some kind of fraud. Look at her, nervous as anything. Her throat tightened. She wanted to explain, to defend herself, but to whom? The teller avoided eye contact, the manager's door remained shut, and the air in the bank thickened with suspicion. Finally, the door opened again. Douglas strode out, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a hushed but urgent tone. He glanced directly at Angela as he said the words. Yes, I need verification immediately. Possible fraud case. Could be dangerous. Yes, send them. Angela's stomach dropped. Dangerous? Her knees weakened, and she gripped the counter for balance. The murmur of the crowd grew louder. Children clutched their parents' hands, as though she were some kind of threat. She turned to the nearest customer, desperate to be seen as human. I promise you, I haven't done anything wrong. But the woman only pulled her child closer, shaking her head. Angela's cheeks burned with shame. Each second felt like an hour, each whisper like a dagger. She had lived her life with dignity, sacrificing for others, serving her community as a nurse. Yet here she was, being treated like a criminal in the middle of a bank lobby. But the next few minutes would break her heart in ways she never imagined. The sound came first, distant, then nearer. Sirens. Angela's pulse quickened. Through the glass doors, flashing lights painted the street in streaks of red and blue. A van screeched to a halt, followed by black SUVs. The doors of the bank swung open, and in marched half a dozen federal agents, their presence commanding instant silence. The room froze. Mothers pulled their children behind them. Men shifted nervously, stepping back. Even Douglas, who had stood smug and certain, paled slightly but forced a smile. That's her, he declared, pointing directly at Angela. His voice cracked with a mixture of fear and triumph. That's the one. Arrest her. Angela's body went cold. The folder slipped from her hands, papers scattering across the polished floor. She felt her chest tighten as though the walls themselves were closing in. Her knees trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall. The lead agent stepped forward, towering above her, his eyes sharp and calculating. He didn't move immediately, Instead, he gestured for her ID and papers. His men surrounded her, their presence heavy, suffocating. Angela bent down slowly, gathering her documents with shaking hands. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. "Please, I can explain." The agent remained silent, flipping through her papers. His face betrayed nothing. The room was so quiet that Angela could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second stretching unbearably. Customers whispered from the safety of the crowd. "She's finished. Should have known. Fraud, I told you." Angela's eyes stung with unshed tears. She had endured suspicion before, endured doubt and prejudice, but this was a public crucifixion. Stripped of dignity, surrounded by strangers who looked at her as if she were a liar, a thief, a criminal. And yet, deep within, a small flame still flickered, the flame of truth. She had done nothing wrong. And truth, though often delayed, always finds its voice. The agent closed the folder, looked directly at Angela, and paused. His gaze lingered, searching her face, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly. Angela held her breath. And what happened next, no one in that room would ever forget. The lead agent's silence stretched across the lobby like a rope pulled tight. Angela's knees trembled, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. She had braced herself for the clink of handcuffs, for the shame of being dragged out in front of the crowd. But instead, he straightened his posture. His face softened, just slightly, as though recognition had struck him. He glanced again at her documents, her ID, her records, the faded photograph tucked neatly inside the folder. And then, without warning, he did something that made the entire room gasp. The agent stepped back, heels clicking together, and raised his hand to his brow in a sharp, formal salute. For a second, Angela thought she was dreaming. The lobby fell into stunned silence. The other agents exchanged quick glances. Then, almost in unison, they too snapped into position, hands to brows, saluting her. The air in the bank shifted. Customers who had moments ago whispered accusations now stared with wide eyes. Douglas, the manager, froze, his mouth opening and closing like a man who had just seen a ghost. Angela's voice trembled. What is happening?" The lead agent lowered his hand and spoke, his voice carrying both respect and authority. "Ma'am, forgive the intrusion. We had no idea. We are honored to be in your presence." Confusion rippled through the crowd. Honored? In her presence? The same woman they had judged as a fraud, humiliated as a liar? The agent continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "Angela Carter, decorated Air Force pilot. During Operation Sentinel, you risked your life to save not only your crew, but hundreds of civilians. Your actions were recorded in our own archives. You are a hero, ma'am. And today we salute you." Angela's breath caught. Memories she had buried deep surged to the surface. The cockpit alarms blaring, the roar of engines failing, the desperate prayer whispered as she guided her plane safely down. She had never spoken of it much. To her it was duty, sacrifice, a chapter closed. Yet here she was, her past unfolding in front of strangers who had just condemned her. Douglas stumbled forward, face pale, voice shaking. This must be a mistake. She was trying to deposit a suspicious check. The lead agent turned, his eyes flashing with contempt. "The only mistake here is yours, sir. This woman has given more to her country than you could ever dream of. And you humiliated her without cause." A murmur swept through the lobby, shame, regret, disbelief. Customers lowered their heads, some biting their lips, others whispering apologies too late for Angela to hear. Angela stood motionless, her heart racing, tears pooling in her eyes. For so long she had carried her burden quietly, never asking for recognition, never demanding respect. And now, in the very place where her dignity had been torn apart, she was being honored publicly. The salute lingered in the air, heavier than any accusation, louder than any whisper of doubt. It was a declaration. She was not a fraud, not a criminal, but a woman of courage and sacrifice. And in that moment, Angela realized something powerful. Justice was not always swift. It did not always come when it was needed most. But when it arrived, it had the power to silence a room, to turn shame into awe, to expose the arrogance of the proud and uplift the dignity of the humble. Her hands stopped trembling. Her spine straightened. For the first time that morning, she allowed herself a small, steady smile. The bank had tried to strip her of respect. Karma had given it back tenfold. The silence that followed was unlike any Angela had ever known. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, the chatter, the whispers, the judgment, all replaced by an air of reverence that weighed heavy in the room. The agents slowly lowered their salutes, but the respect in their eyes remained. The lead agent nodded once more before speaking. "Ma'am, we are deeply sorry for what you just endured. You deserve honor, not humiliation." Angela pressed the folder against her chest, her fingers gripping the edges tightly. She wanted to speak, but her throat was tight, her emotions tangled between relief and sorrow. How many times in her life had she endured suspicion? How many quiet battles had she fought, unrecognized, unseen? This morning had been the sharpest wound yet. Yet here she stood, her dignity restored in a way she never expected. The customers shifted uneasily. A man who had whispered fraud earlier looked down at his shoes, shame burning his face. A mother who had clutched her child close now pushed the girl gently forward, whispering, "Say thank you to the lady." The child, with innocent eyes, looked up at Angela and said softly, "Thank you for your service." Angela's chest tightened, not with humiliation this time, but with something far heavier, the bittersweet weight of recognition. And then the manager, Douglas. His confidence was shattered, his arrogance drained. He stammered, his words fumbling as he tried to repair what could not be undone. "Ms. Carter, I had no idea. Please forgive me. I was only trying to protect the bank's interests." Angela turned to him slowly. Her eyes, wet with tears yet steady, met his. For a moment, the room waited, expecting her to lash out, to humiliate him as he had humiliated her. But Angela did not need revenge. Dignity was its own form of justice. She spoke softly, her voice calm yet firm. "You judged me before you knew me. You looked at me and saw suspicion instead of truth. Today, it was exposed in front of everyone. I don't need your apology. What I need is for you to remember this moment the next time someone walks through that door." Douglas lowered his gaze, unable to respond. Angela gathered her papers from the counter, thanked the lead agent with a nod, and walked toward the exit. Each step echoed louder than the sirens that had brought the agents in, louder than the whispers that had once condemned her. Outside, the sunlight bathed her face. She inhaled deeply, letting the air fill her lungs, letting the sting of humiliation fade into the strength of survival. She had come to deposit a check, but she left having deposited something far greater into the hearts of everyone who witnessed the morning's events. A lesson in humility, in respect, in justice. Because justice had arrived, not in a courtroom, not in a headline, but in a bank lobby where truth refused to stay silent. And now, I ask you, how many times do we judge without knowing the full story? How many more Angeles will be doubted, humiliated, and dismissed before respect becomes the first response instead of the last? Tell me, if you were standing in that bank, would you have spoken up or would you have stayed silent? If stories like this move your heart, don't forget to subscribe and like this video, because the next story may just open your eyes even more.